Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. I'm Beth, and today we're setting up my son's custom bullet journal for September 2024 and continuing our theme of entities from the Magnus Archives, which is a weekly horror fiction anthology podcast. This month, that entity is the Hunt. One of the primal entities, the Hunt embodies the raw, animalistic fear of being chased, pursued, or preyed upon. It's a force that speaks to the most basic survival instincts, the terror of being pursued. While humans have largely distanced themselves from nature's food chain, the influence of the Hunt still lurks in those with a deep love for tracking and killing, for the thrill of pursuit. It's not an everyday fear for most, but for some, it's an obsession, a deep-seated need that can't be ignored. Let's hear from Alice Tonner, nicknamed Daisy, about what it's like to be an avatar of the Hunt. I've always been driven by the hunt, by the thrill of the chase, the satisfaction of finding and bringing down what I believe to be monsters. It's who I am, who I've always been, and I suppose it all started when I was a kid. I never cared much for following the rules or doing what was expected. I didn't see the point. I'd play with Calvin, my best friend, even though everyone told me I shouldn't because I was a girl. I didn't care. We'd play where we weren't supposed to, take risks because it felt good to push against the limits. One day, when I was 11, I dared Calvin to go into this old abandoned building we'd always played near. I never expected what happened next. He didn't come back, so I went in after him, and that's when I saw it. 2 dead bodies, ripped apart like they'd killed each other. I felt something then, something I hadn't expected. Fear for sure, but also excitement. It was thrilling. Calvin was there, just standing, not himself. And behind him was this thing, this creature, covered in open, bloodless wounds. It didn't speak, but somehow it was talking to him. Then Calvin turned, slammed me into a fence, and I blacked out as the metal pierced my back. I woke up in the hospital with a scar on my back that the doctor said looked like a daisy. That's where the nickname comes from. I kept it, partly because I liked the irony. After that day, Calvin changed. 6 kids got hurt or killed over the next few years, and I knew he was involved somehow, but I could never prove it. Eventually, I joined the police. I've always been good at hunting down my targets. I don't think too much. I just pick something and go after it. That's what got me sectioned in the first place, dealing with supernatural cases under Section 31. I've never been good at investigations, not like Basira. I'm more of a blunt instrument, a hunting dog, loyal to the people I care about, but relentless when I've got target in my sights. But I guess that's what makes me valuable in Section 31. I get things done, even if I'm not subtle about it. After the apocalypse, though, it's like the hunt consumed me. I became the thing I'd always chased, bestial, savage. I couldn't stop. All I wanted was to keep hunting. Worse, I wanted Basira to join me. That part of me, the part that's always been more animal than human, finally took over, and there was no going back. On the right of this cover page, we have Daisy, who just told us her story. And on the left, as usual, I'm putting in a quote. I typically do pick a quote from Shakespeare to put into these setups for my son. This one's a little different. So this one reads, "We do pursue and hunt the time to die," which is from the play Edward III, which you won't find listed in Shakespeare's bodies of works, but it is rather widely accepted by scholars that the play Edward III was at least partially written by Shakespeare, though they don't think he wrote the entire thing. So this one over here is just a little bit different than it normally is, but we're going to go with it because it is the quote that worked. Alright, we are ready to move on to the calendar spread, and before this calendar spread goes completely off the rails, and I mean completely off the rails, let's learn a little bit more about the hunt. There are no known artifacts that are tied to the hunt, but its ritual, potentially called the Ever Chase, has been whispered about. Gertrude Robinson, the last archivist for the Magnus Archives, speculated that it could happen in the US, though she was far from certain. predicting it might unfold after the burieds ritual. We've already had the buried here on this channel. There's a known place tied to this power, the forest domain, and I'm going to sprinkle in some forest trees throughout this setup. The forest domain is a nightmarish realm where the pack hunts together, driven by a shared bloodlust. Yet when there's no prey left, they'll turn on one another, a constant cycle of predator and prey. Then there are the hunters, avatars of the hunt itself. They embody this savage instinct, reveling in the satisfaction of the chase. For some, it's a thrill. For others, it's an addiction, an all-consuming need. They can sense their prey, almost tasting the blood in the air, knowing where to strike. Unlike most, hunters have a terrifying ability to harm and kill other avatars, even those of different entities. They don't need mystical weapons. They can tear them apart with their hands or use guns and knives. This makes them valuable to other powers, often forced into service through fear or sheer need, becoming the ultimate predator even among the supernatural. Alright y'all, if you look real close, and you may have caught it already, I have one too many rows for the month of September. And when I tell you that I got confused first sketching out this calendar, and I counted these rows like 5 times, yeah, I have no idea how I ended up with these extra rows, but we are going to get some extra dot grid paper and stick it over these 2 areas, one here on the right and then another on the left. And if you'll notice now, I'm covering up my 30 for September, which I don't notice and I don't catch. And then I sketch in extra trees and a moon to kind of cover up those pasty bits that are on there, and I still don't catch it. I don't catch it until the kid comes to pick up the journal, and I'm like, we're just gonna have to add in a block for 30 wherever you want to add in a block for 30, because your mom completely messed up this calendar page. And there is plenty of space there in the middle to put in a September 30th and just kind of have it floating all by itself. And y'all, sometimes it happens. It just happens. It's just the way things go. It took me about 3.5-4 minutes to cut some extra paper and cover this up. So it didn't really take that long because I do keep a stash of cutoffs handy. Alright, we're ready to move on to his spend tracker and his notes page. And here we're going to pay a little bit of homage to the werewolf. Now, the Magnus Archives does not directly reference werewolves, but there is statement 31 titled First Hunt. In this statement, Lawrence Mortimer, craving the thrill of a real hunt, organized a trip to the Appalachian Trail with Arden Neely, a fellow skeptic. On their first day, they encountered a strange man whistling, "A hunting we shall go." The man sniffed them and ominously said, "Tomorrow will be a good day for a run." That night, Lawrence heard laughter outside his tent. The next day, after spotting an elk, Lawrence turned to find Arden gone. He soon discovered him dead, his throat torn out. The same man, now covered in blood, appeared, forcing Lawrence to flee. He ran through the woods, only to be chased back to Arden's body. Under the moonlight, the man resembled a werewolf, sharp and predatory. Lawrence managed to shoot him multiple times, slowing him down but not killing him before escaping. Arden's body was recovered later, and his death was ruled an animal attack. Some version of gaping carnivore teeth appears in most imagery for the hunt. It's on the official cards and all of those other things. So I wanted to make sure that I got that imagery in here. And then just to fill in some other space, we're pulling in some more of those forest tree domains and giving a little bit more contrast to the page. And then we're ready to set up the 2 sets of weeklies for September. We have 2 weeks on each spread. And on this first spread, we're going to talk about statement number 9, A Father's Love. Julia Montauk grew up as the daughter of Robert Montauk, a serial killer responsible for at least 40 murders over 5 years. When she was 7, she found her mother missing, leaving only a strange pendant behind. After that, her father, a policeman, grew distant, spending time in his shed and drinking heavily. He quit the police, but he told Julia he was working the night shift. Julia noticed bloodstains on him and learned to clean up after him. At age 10, Julia overheard her father speaking to a man named Rayner, which triggered Robert to intensify his work. She eventually discovered photos in a locked, dark room showing faces with strange symbols. One night, after waking to find a brackish water running from the taps and strange knocking at the door, Julia fled to the shed. Inside, her father stood bathed in blue light, performing a ritual over a corpse. The presence that had been pursuing her disappeared when Robert finished the ritual by stabbing the heart. Julia realized the body wore the same pendant as her mother's. Robert fled when the police arrived, and the manhunt ended in his arrest. The body in the shed was Christopher Loam, one of 41 victims whose hearts were preserved in jars. The pendant was tied to a cult called the People's Church of the Divine Host, led by Maxwell Rayner. Robert was later murdered in his prison cell under mysterious circumstances. Here on this weekly, I chose to illustrate one of those hearts in a jar as well as Julia's mother's locket. With the first 2 weeks of September set up and ready to go, we're ready to move on and set up the next 2 weeks. And I am going to do this exactly the same way. I'm just going to flip-flop the calendar from one side of the spread to the other and the to-do lists from the one side to the other. Now, moving on to yet another one of our statements that involves the hunt, and this is statement number 10, titled Vampire Killer. Trevor the Tramp Herbert lived on the streets of Manchester after his parents died when he was young. He and his brother Nigel grew up in foster care but eventually ran away. Trevor's life took a turn in 1959 when he and Nigel met a creature posing as Sylvia MacDonald. She invited them to her home, which appeared strangely undisturbed except for specific paths through the dust. After growing suspicious, Trevor went to Nigel's room to leave, but Sylvia appeared and attacked Nigel. She used shark-like teeth to tear out Nigel's throat, followed by her tubular tongue to drain his blood. After she was satiated and collapsed, Trevor avenged his brother, stabbing her and setting her on fire. He fled the burning house, but the trauma lingered. Years later, in 1968, Trevor encountered another vampire named Robert Arden. After following him and intervening in his attack on a woman, Trevor fought him off and eventually killed him with a wooden stake. He also accidentally killed a man named Allard DuPont in 1982, mistaking him for a vampire. Trevor's statement was accompanied by a small bag of shark teeth, or were they, which were analyzed but found to not match any known species. The original teeth and files have since disappeared from the archives, with Jonathan Sims reading only from a photocopy of a photocopy. The repeated imagery of shark teeth in relation to vampires is one of those things that I knew that I wanted to include in this setup, so those were actual shapes of shark teeth. And we're ready to move on to the playlist and reflection spread. And we've met Julia Montauk, and we've met Trevor Herbert, but what happens when they meet one another? Julia Montauk and Trevor the Tramp Herbert met in July 2010 under unusual circumstances. Julia, haunted by the legacy of her serial killer father, moved frequently to escape her past. In the summer of 2010, she settled in Manchester and worked the night shift as a security guard for an old office building. One of the building's tenants, DKN Systems, worked at night, and only Vardam Darvish, a strange employee, ever spoke to her. Trevor had been investigating Darvish, suspecting him of being a vampire, behind the disappearance of homeless people in the area. While Darvish smelled strange, Trevor noted he didn't smell like a vampire. One night, Trevor saw Darvish carrying a box, which clearly contained a body, into the building. Trevor broke in, and Julia, unaware of his intentions, chased him. On the 4th floor, Julia found the offices empty, with the windows boarded and painted black. She heard a dripping sound and found a room where the floor was covered in impossibly still black water. At the center of the room, a man lay on a table, liquid dripping from his eyes and mouth. 3 DKN workers stood motionless around him, posed as if screaming. Julia stepped into the room and fell into the cold, black water. Trevor, having followed Julia, pulled her out, but Darvish attacked, nearly killing Trevor. Julia noticed that Darvish's pupils had consumed his irises entirely and saw a tattoo on him, the same hand with a closed-eye design her mother's pendant had. Using Trevor's fallen knife, Julia killed Darvish. Instantly, the water dried up and the workers collapsed dead. The man on the table was also deceased. After ensuring the threat was gone, Julia and Trevor left together. Since that night, they've hunted monsters as a team, united by their shared experiences. And that is it for the entity that is the hunt. We're going to flip back to the beginning to do a little bit of a flip through. I've also decided that this wolf, he needs some red eyes, so we're going to add those in before continuing the flip through. We do have more entities than there are months in the year, so there's been one or two that the boy has left out of his list, and then he does have a way to wrap up another one of the entities that he wanted to get in at year's end. So we have 4 more I think we're going to do: October, November, December, and then a year-end wrap-up entity as well. Considering this channel started with these creative bullet journal setups, I appreciate those of you who do take the time to watch these videos. His journal here is getting super fluffy and chunky. If you still like these creative bullet journaling setups, you know what to do. Please go to big thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't already, and I will catch you in the next one.